it's been an ongoing thing now for over a decade that basically Game of Thrones, the whole story, the Song of Ice and Fire, hasn't been concluded. And, obviously we had a conclusion to the TV series, which I think unanimously people just absolutely hated. I also hated it. I think it was terrible. I don't want to go into every single detail why it was shit. I think we all know. It was rushed. Benioff and Weiss, I don't know why they didn't give it to other writers. It's so frustrating because they wanted to keep it for themselves, which was so selfish. Because
and didn't they go off to do Star Wars, but then that never happened? And
that's ultimately wanted to do. They had plans to do more things, and they got bored of the whole Game of Thrones thing, and they needed to wrap it up because they wanted to work on other projects. And it's just, there are other people. Look, for me, when it comes to the consensus of opinions, I like to go against it. I like to give shows the benefit of the doubt when they're hated, because sometimes people's expectations can be different to what actually happens in the series, and it might not necessarily reflect the quality of it. It might just be about the viewer's perspective and stuff. Yeah. And it started off basically following the material from the actual books by George R.R. Martin. Yeah. And honestly, I just think for you, Saul, the fact that it's so hard to recommend the show now because it's just it's just remembered now as the show that had a terrible ending. But when it was at its peak, it was just unbelievable. It was god tier television in every respect.
It's like one of the greatest shows ever made, right? That's what a lot of people.
Yeah,
are saying,
100%.
Piece of television.
Every single season was consistently the quality of the first 4, I'd say, and we had what George R.R. Martin predicted was 12 seasons of this story, then it would have just gone down as the best show of all time, I think. It was just the heights that it went to was just so off the charts compared to anything else. Just every aspect. And I'm speaking as someone who's not really a fan of fantasy. I'm not a fan of dragons and, all these big sci-fi things going on and magic and all that stuff. That's why I'm not a massive fan of Harry Potter or, Tolkien. But when it comes to Game of Thrones, it was like every single aspect of the show was just 10 out of 10, masterclass in every respect. And it's because the lore that George R.R. Martin created in The Song of Ice and Fire was just so detailed and so fleshed out. All the characters they were so deeply layered and complex. It was just watching this big game of chess play out just in every season. And there was just, honestly, the acting, the dialogue alone, it was like poetry, especially in the first season. I'd say probably the dialogue in the first season is just every word pouring out of every character's mouth is just like music. They're saying all these these things that obviously were taken from the source material, and I'll admit, people absolutely hate Benioff and Weiss for good reason, for the way that they ended the show. But we have to give it to them; they adapted it very well when they had the source material to work on. But when they run out, they just really they struggled so bad, and it's just a shame that they. Basically, I don't think that they really predicted that George R.R. Martin would take so long to finish the rest of the books.
Yeah, this has been 5 or 6 years, right?
It's been
that he's saying he's going to finish the.
No,
the
it's
book.
not way longer. It's been
really.
It's been nearly 15 years.
Oh, man, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because coming from I'm not as big into Game of Thrones. Unfortunately, I haven't watched the show.
Yeah.
You're a massive fan, and it does beg the question: what does he owe the fans? Because obviously it's his world, it's his law. He can take as long as he likes. But then up to a certain point, it does seem like, do you have any motivation to finish it?
Yeah.
Do you care about your fans? Is that how?
It's essentially because he's been focusing so much on television work. He goes to all these talks, and he's written all these other books that kind of flesh out all the characters and the lore and stuff like that, side projects that he's just seems to be more interested in. And so along the way of writing these books, he's just kind of deviated. And I think it's all come from the fame that he's gotten from the television shows and, House of the Dragon. He's just, like I said, the lore of just the universe that he's created is so fucking just infinitely huge. And I think he's really struggled now to kind of go back to why he's so popular in the first place. I mean, Song of Ice and Fire is ultimately the reason why he's famous. And I think fans at the beginning, like, let's say the first 5 years, they were adamant, and that's fair enough to an extent because, you know, they wanted to know how the story ended. They wanted a conclusion to the story, and they were just so disappointed by the TV show that they were like, George R. R. Martin, come on, let's actually finish it and give us the, you know, the payoff and the finale that we needed. And Winds of Winter, which is the next book, isn't even the last book of the series. There's supposed to be another book coming after that, which is called A Dream of Spring, which I think we all unanimously as fans have come to the conclusion that he will never finish the books in his lifetime.
Well,
I think he's like 76 years old.
Do you think it's a lack of motivation? He just doesn't
I
care
do. So
anymore?
let's go from the timeline of events that happened. So in June 2010, 15 years ago, Martin has written 4 chapters of The Winds of Winter. Then in July, he said he's written more than 100 pages. Then he predicts that Winds of Winter in April 2011 will take 3 years to finish. A Dance with Dragons is published. That was his last book, the 5th novel. And then Martin has written 400 pages in 2012. So it kind of was giving the impression to fans that he had it more under control than he did. I mean, this was over 10 years ago, and he said that he's written 400 pages. I mean, they're all big books, and then he's just made false predictions. And the way that he's reacted to fans, people have got an issue with because he tends to get kind of frustrated with the way fans get
defensive.
He gets defensive about it because he's just kind of like, look, you know, I've never said it's going to happen on this date, but you know, it's just a prediction. But it gets to a certain point where it's
got
like,
to consider the fans at some point.
Of course you do. I mean,
you know, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who are, you know, fulfilling your livelihood.
Exactly.
So they are funding your dream.
And
you've given him a lot of money.
Exactly. And
that man has made a lot of money off your enjoyment. You know?
Exactly. And he said,
look, on HBO.
He said in 2016, Martin reveals he missed multiple deadlines in 2015. He said it gave him no pleasure to report that Winds of Winter was still unfinished. He described how his publishers gave him 2 separate deadlines the previous year, first in October, then in December, blah, blah, blah. So it's just a whole, it just seems like he's giving constant excuses. And then in May 2015, we've got to remember, this is 10 years ago. 10 years ago, he said, the October deadline seemed very doable to me. And then he felt confident he can complete the book by the end of the year, but missed multiple deadlines. 2016, he wasn't writing anything until Winds is finished, so he said that he was really focusing on it on that year. 17 predicts the book will be out in 2017.
No.
Then 17, he'll confirm he'll release a Westeros book in 2018. He told fans that he is still months away from That's
wild. So just to put it into context, for half of our life, he's been writing these books. That's mad, mate.
Yeah. It's kind of devastating to know that we'll never get a payoff. I think it's pretty much a matter of fact at this point that we will never get. Unless he just randomly all of a sudden just releases the book, like, and like maybe like Dream of Spring at the same time. I'm thinking maybe, like, I don't know, it could be the case that the way that the the 8th season of Game of Thrones was concluded had similarities to the way that he decided it all to plan out, and he saw the reaction and he thought, oh Jesus, okay, I don't want it to finish like that. Let's go back. Let's change it all up and stuff like that.
But then it seems like that's kind of taken over his life, all the TV stuff.
It has taken over his life massively. Yeah, that's the thing.
And
but it's just like, man, you've got to make time for this stuff. I mean, we will give you the benefit of the doubt as fans. We will give you, but come on, man, it's been over.
That's over 10 years.
It's been over a decade. It's been nearly 15 years, and it will never happen now. And the Game of Thrones, we've all been waiting for a conclusion to this story since 1996.
So not even, he had the whole pandemic.
Yeah.
Where everyone was stuck at home.
Yeah. And then we've got all these spin-offs. We've got all these spin-offs now. We've got House of the Dragon. We've got all these separate side projects that he does, and a lot of people are now comparing him to Tolkien. I'm not a massive Tolkien fan.
Mm-hmm.
The Lord of the Rings, I've never really watched the movies. They don't really appeal to me. Like I said, I'm not a massive fan of fantasy stuff. But Game of Thrones, Man, so I think you'd absolutely love it, and I just think that at some point in your life,
up to which season? Though, because of what you told me.
Well, I think if you got committed to the series,
Okay.
you would want to finish it.
It
It would just be no doubt, and I think it would be fascinating. I mean, the last few seasons are entertaining, and it's entertaining to talk about why they're so bad compared to the other shows. It is an interesting conversation. With Game of Thrones, it's very much a miserable kind of universe. It's all about power. It's all about corruption. It's about playing the game and not being, you don't really get any heroes. You get people who are smart. We have people who are heroes in Game of Thrones who are the typical protagonist of a story where they're honorable and they go against the villains who are nasty and fucked up, but they are the ones that ultimately lose. And I think that's what I love so much about his world that he's built, because it's just so fucking power hungry and violent and gritty and dirty. And I'd say a lot of people are comparing him to Tolkien, saying maybe it's come to the point where he's built this universe up in a way that's just so cynical, where he kind of doesn't know how to conclude it in a satisfying way. And whereas with Tolkien, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more about your traditional story of a hero, right?
Oh, for sure, 100%. Yeah, the classic hero's journey, and then very much influenced by his time in the army, because those books were written between 937 and 949. That's when Tolkien wrote Lord of the Rings.
Right.
So it was very much informed by the world that he was living in.
Right.
And I guess the classic style of fantasy, which he helped perfect with that. So it's really interesting. And I think the big difference with Lord of the Rings is that those books are like 80 plus years old. There wouldn't be a Game of Thrones without Tolkien. Every piece of popular fantasy leads back to Lord of the Rings, and I find it interesting with the fan community for Lord of the Rings, because Tolkien obviously died a very long time ago. So really, a lot of their comparison has been with the films or the TV show. So in that regard, there isn't as much pressure on the creators. It's more on the studio, because it's such a recognizable brand, and obviously Amazon just did Rings of Power. Right. You've heard about that, right? Yeah. The most expensive show ever made. It's all original material, and just a lot of pressure on Amazon and their showrunners as well, because Lord of the Rings has just so much lore to it. I mean, the fucking appendix that Tolkien wrote for Lord of the Rings is like that. It's just it's crazy.
I have so much admiration for that. That's crazy.
I dread to think what it would be like if Tolkien was alive today, writing anything else.
Do you think all the adaptations are generally very, loyal to the source material?
The interesting thing about the Peter Jackson films is that generally they were very they were loyal to the spirit of the books, but there are a lot of changes that actually, quite a few.
Oh wow, I didn't know.
But then they put a lot of those back in the extended editions. Mm-hmm. But purists generally don't mind, because those films were so beloved and well done.
Wow. So they got away with the changes.
Yeah. Oh no, for sure.
Interesting. That's kind of
cool.
Because
Lord of the Rings, that is one of the best trilogies of all time. And even if you can pick, there are loads of plot holes to find. Do you think
I'd like do you think I'd like Lord of the Rings?
I think you would. Yeah. No. Absolutely. Just don't watch The Hobbit.
Oh, really?
The thing they did with The Hobbit was that was obviously written before Lord of the Rings, and it was a children's book. Right. Very simple, and Lord of the Rings was kind of written more for teenagers and adults. But what they tried to do with The Hobbit is they tried to make it like Lord of the Rings. They had to stretch out this one book. It's such a small book into 3 films, and by adding in a ton of bullshit that just wasn't there.
Okay, so they didn't get away with it.
It really fell short.
I see.
And
if they maybe just condensed it a little bit.
Yeah, no, if they had done one film, I think it could have been on the level of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
but
obviously
it was
it
was a big mistake for them to do that, because The Hobbit is it's not Lord of the Rings. It's a completely different
Were they did they do badly then, the films?
They did, yeah.
They did.
Because the first one was pretty well received, but then especially Battle of the Five Armies, people really hated that.
Do they?
Because it wasn't Lord of the Rings, even though you had Peter Jackson back. And actually, he was rushed by the studio to do it, because they gave him so much time of Lord of the Rings, so many resources, a lot, just a lot more money. And With The Hobbit, it felt like he was restricting. He was kind of doing it like not without passion, but more to like meet a mandate. It's like, okay, I've got to deliver this on time. So it didn't hit the same, man.
It's a shame when you. It's very rare that you just have some, a stream of adaptations that are just all fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about Harry Potter last week. I think the amount of film. How many films were there?
8.
There was 8 films.
7 books, 8 films. Yeah.
I think those 8 films are pretty damn good when it comes to being well received. I don't think it's not like there's one that sticks out. I mean, everyone has a favorite. Everyone has a least favorite.
Yeah. But then the odd thing was there was kind of a pushback against the first 2 films, the Columbus ones.
Was there? Oh,
yeah. Well, mostly Chamber of Secrets because they're like it's a bit juvenile, it's a bit childish, but.
Yeah.
I mean, those first 2 films, they're really the truest to the books.
And they're kind of like nostalgia.
They're very nostalgic. And like the thing with the first 2 books is they're very much more children's books because the thing that was interesting about Potter is that like it would evolve as the kids grew up.
Yeah, exactly.
So the films got darker, the books got darker, blah, 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 blah. But no, generally very well received for the most part.
So you say they kind of got grittier as they went
along.
along.
Yeah. Especially like
I like the idea of that.
Goblet of Fire. Again, I think we said this on one of the early podcasts. Probably like my least favorite of the films, I would say, because just compared to the book, they cut so much out.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating story, and there's a lot more to the book.
Yeah. I want to know how you guys feel about it. Do you think there's still a chance? Do you still actually think that there's still a chance that he might one day release the book and say, you know what, guys, I had you all on. I was writing it all this time. Just releases Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring the exact same day. How fucking mad would that be? Fans would go fucking insane.